Upon returning from my business trip, my daughter clung to me, tears streaming down her face. "What's wrong, Daddy?" The story my daughter shared once her tears subsided was something I could never have imagined. If what she said was true, I couldn't rest until my husband and that person were properly punished for hurting her. After all, this was about defending the dignity of my daughter and me. My name is Anne. I'm a 35-year-old office worker. My husband Hans is also an office worker, and he is several years my senior. We met while working at the same company, and we have been married for 15 years now. We have a 12-year-old daughter, Julia, who is preparing to start private middle school this spring. Though both of us have busy jobs right now, we lead a peaceful life as a family of 3. The only thing I have been troubled about is my relationship with Hans's mom, Carol, who lives about a 30-minute drive away. Carol and her husband Felix had a marriage where Felix moved into her family's home. The house they live in has been in Carol's family for generations, and apparently, they have some sort of noble lineage, which she is quite proud of. Hence, I have been constantly reminded that a woman from a background like mine isn't suitable for their prestigious family. While both Felix and Hans are now just regular office workers, they always emphasize how different their backgrounds are compared to mine. Carol was against our marriage due to these family standards, but thanks to Felix's intervention with a "she's the woman our son chose" argument, we were able to get married. Before our wedding, I had been hearing such things, which was unsettling. At the beginning of our marriage, Hans wanted us to live with them, so we did. However, living together was hard. Every meal I made was dismissed by Carol with comments like, I can't stomach food made by someone of such low class." And any differences in how I did chores would send her into rants about how, "This is why you don't marry someone with no proper upbringing." Every day was like that. A few months into living together, there was an uproar when money went missing from Carol's purse. "There's a thief in this house. Come on, let's look a bit more before jumping to conclusions." "No, it must have been Anne who stole it." "Let's look a bit more before jumping to conclusions." "No, it must have been Anne who stole it." "Enough. There's no way she did it. The only person here from such a background is Anne. She must be the thief." From the get-go, Carol accused and lashed out at me. Of course, I denied any wrongdoing. Hans and Felix defended me, but Carol kept insisting she couldn't feel safe with a thief in the house. And the accusations kept coming. Money's gone, jewelry's missing. Nearly a year of daily accusations took a toll on me until I had a mental breakdown. I began seeing a psychiatrist who recommended that I move out. After much pleading, Hans finally agreed that if it would give me peace of mind, we should live separately. Life after moving out wasn't entirely stress-free. I'd get anxious just hearing Hans talk to Carol on the phone, but I figured it was better than living with her. 6 months after we moved out, the ever-kind Felix passed away. I should have been seated with the family at the funeral, but there was no spot for me. Where should Anne sit? I don't know. Why not over there somewhere? She's not really family, is she? Understood. Anne, it's your father's last goodbye. Don't worry about me. Whether it was spite because of our decision to live separately, I couldn't believe she'd do this. But I told myself, at least I wasn't kicked out of the funeral home. But I thought at least I got to say goodbye to Felix, who always had my back. Another 6 months later, I remembered when I gave birth to Julia 12 years ago. When Carol visited the hospital, the first thing she did was tickle Julia's feet. Julia giggled as her soles were tickled. Phew! At least her nerves seem fine. That's a relief. How can you say something like that? First giving birth to a girl. What a useless daughter-in-law you are. She left those words behind and walked out of the hospital room. There wasn't even a congratulations. After that, Carol would openly say to Julia, "You're from bad blood," and treat her differently, because she was a step-sibling's child. Although Carol was her grandmother, Julia didn't grow close to her. Maybe if you weren't always so cold to my mom, Julia would warm up to her. Do you really think that? Shouldn't you first confront a person who calls her own granddaughter bad blood? All of this could be resolved if you showed a bit of understanding. I just can't anymore. I prefer not to interact with her. I try to avoid seeing Carol as much as possible. Other than weddings or funerals, I didn't meet her. Even after over a decade, when I run into her, I still tremble uncontrollably. To reconcile with someone my mind and body rejected so strongly was impossible. So my wish was to maintain our life with just the three of us. However, the moment it was decided that Julia would attend a private middle school, Carol started contacting us frequently. Julia's advancement was based on her own wishes. But when Carol learned she got into a prestigious school, she exclaimed, "Just as expected, from our family's granddaughter." Julia, who is now attending that elite middle school, seems to have shifted in Carol's eyes from a child of bad blood to her pride and joy. Julia and I were stunned at Carol's rapid change of attitude, but Hans must have thought, "Finally, Julia and I are recognized by my mom." He started saying, "My mom says frequently, my mom's offering to buy Julia new shoes. Wanna go shopping?" I replied, "Sorry, but the school has specific shoes they need to wear, and she doesn't really need any casual shoes right now." Hans suggested, "Why not just have a meal with my mom once in a while?" I replied, "I'm sorry, I'll pass. If you want to dine out, how about you and mom go?" "Maybe next time, can you tell her that?" Hans asked Julia, "Will you go, Julia?" Julia replied, "If mom won't go, I won't go either. I have to study for the test to determine my class after I enter school." "Fine, whatever. I might just have to bear it for a few hours." I understand that she's Hans's only mother and that she's important to him. But thinking about our past, I couldn't bring myself to get close. How much longer till I can get along with Carol again? I couldn't give Hans an answer to a question I didn't know myself. Then one day I had to go on a 5-day business trip. Julia can cook simple meals by herself, so I wasn't worried about food, but I was concerned about leaving her alone if Hans came home late from work. "It's okay, you'll call in the evening, right?" "Yes, of course I'll call every night." "Just make sure you lock up properly, okay?" I got it. I left Julia in Hans's care and headed off on my trip. Every night during my business trip, as promised, I would call Julia as soon as I checked into my hotel. Whenever I called, Hans was always out, but everything else seemed fine, which was a relief. The next day, I finished my work earlier than expected and told Julia that I'd be back the following day. But I noticed something seemed off with her. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Nothing. I'm just waiting for you to come back. Hurry home." Her desperate plea made me anxious. Worried about her, I took the first morning train and headed straight home. When I arrived, Julia, who was about to graduate, had finished her morning classes and was already home. "And home," I exclaimed. Julia, seemingly relieved, surprisingly hugged me. "What's with you? So clingy all of a sudden." I asked, "How about we have lunch?" "Yes." Throughout meal prep, she hovered nearby, as if she had something to say, then sighed heavily and walked away. She kept doing this. When I served lunch, she sat down, but seemed lost in thought and didn't start eating. "What's going on?" I asked. She choked up and said, "Dad," and started crying. Mealtime was no longer a priority. I calmed her down and decided to listen. "When you're ready, just tell me." "Okay. Actually, the day you left for your trip, Grandma came over. She said she was staying for a bit. She wasn't around during the day and always came home with Dad in the evening, so I didn't think much of it, but, well, on the third night after Grandma came, I overheard her talking with Dad." "What were they talking about?" "Dad, half a year ago on Grandma's recommendation, he had a blind date." "Blind dates are for people looking to get married, right?" But Dad's already married to you." "It's weird, isn't it?" "Yes, that's strange. I heard that Dad has started dating that woman from the arranged date. He told me he divorced Mom and decided to marry her." "Really? He told you that?" "Carol has always been against our marriage, so she'd probably be all for our divorce." Hans is frustrated with me for not being understanding towards Carol, who has been lonely on her own. Maybe that's why he started thinking of divorce. "So, Dad brought that woman home last night. He said she's going to be your new mom. And then, I said my mom is my only mom. But they both got angry and said, a woman of that bad blood isn't a mother." Both of them were really scary, and I hugged her tightly as she started crying again. Dad said he was going to change the locks before Mom came home, and kick her out. So, I'm relieved Mom came home before him. Alright, you went through a lot while I was on my business trip. I'm sorry, it's not your fault, Mom. Just as she finished talking, we heard the front door open. Hey, is Julia home? I'm having the locks changed soon, so hand over the spare key to me. Saying this, Hans walked into the living room where we were. He was taken aback seeing me sitting on the couch. What? Why? Weren't you away on business until tomorrow? I finished my work early. Oh well, good job then. He quickly left the living room, probably to call Carol. I took Julia's hand and we left the house. It's in his name after all. If he wants to kick me out by changing the locks, then be my guest. I won't say I was flawless during our 15-year marriage. There are probably others who would have tolerated such situations better. The thing with Carol? I was just too weak, I guess. But to suddenly introduce a stranger as the new mom to our teenage daughter without formally applying for a divorce, and to scare her like this, was unforgivable. I decided to move back to my parents' home and have a lawyer handle the divorce. Hans and Carol wanted a divorce, but they also wanted custody of Julia. Julia is only 12 and can't choose her guardian. However, I have a full-time job and earn as much as my husband. So I decided to fight head-on. The divorce mediation done through our lawyers didn't work out, and we ended up in divorce arbitration. Though the root cause was my bad relationship with Carol, I had diaries and records from my visits to the psychiatrist, showing I was mentally tormented. Hans got some credit for accepting our separation, but his infidelity was deemed unacceptable. The mediator was also able to hear Julia's wishes, even though she was under 15 years old. The arbitrators also considered Julia's wishes, and she cited Hans's infidelity and being constantly referred to as bad blood by Carol as reasons to live with me. So in the end, I was granted custody. Carol seemed ready to sue, but Hans gave up on custody. The divorce was finalized with me receiving alimony from both him and Carol. I also got a lump sum for child support, which was a substantial amount. Also, knowing that Hans' potential match was already married, I pursued alimony. Then I heard she left him, realizing the only thing he had going for him was his family name. This situation ruined his chances of remarrying. I was called a greedy woman by Carol, but I figured I might as well get what I can. Considering my future, looking back, it all seems like a simple story. When I recall the last time I saw Carol at the family court, I wonder why I ever feared such a small woman. Later on, it became known throughout the neighborhood that Carol lost her granddaughter, who she boasted about getting into an Ivy League middle school due to our divorce, and that she had been bad-mouthing her daughter-in-law. Furthermore, the imprudence of introducing a potential match to her already married son became the talk of the town, making it impossible for her to continue living in the home she was born and raised in. She moved in with Hans after selling her house, but I heard he also found it difficult to stay at his job due to the recent events and ended up quitting. So their living situation became quite modest. Since then, I started a new life with Julia in a different environment. Work has been going well, and although there are times when Julia has to shoulder more responsibilities, we support each other, and I intend to give it my all until she becomes independent. And now I truly want to live my life on my own terms. Thank you for watching the video all the way to the end. If you resonated with the content, please leave a positive rating and a comment.